A single powerful phrase from Iran's president has put the entire world on edge. Total war. So now we are going to dig into what's really behind this declaration, look at the recent military conflict that set the stage, and figure out what could possibly happen next in this incredibly high-stakes standoff. So here it is, the quote that set it all off. In a recent interview, the Iranian president, Pezeshkian, said, "We are at total war with the United States, Israel, and Europe. They want to bring our country to its knees." You know, that's not something you hear from a world leader every day. So you have to ask, what on earth is behind this kind of language? Right, so what does he actually mean by total war? I mean, that's a term with a ton of historical weight, suggesting a nation is mobilizing literally everything it has. Why frame the situation in such absolute terms? And why now? Well, Pezeshkian himself gives us a pretty big clue. He draws this really sharp line between the past and the present. He's basically saying, hey, this isn't like the Iran-Iraq war. That was a conventional fight, clear battle lines, a single enemy. He argues that today's conflict is way more complex, a struggle on multiple fronts where the pressure is coming from everywhere at once. It's a war fought not just with bombs, but with banks and bytes, too. And he actually breaks this total war down into 4 key fronts. See, it's not just about military security. He's claiming the West is attacking the livelihood of his people through sanctions, trying to undermine their culture and meddling in their politics, all with the end goal of bringing Iran, in his words, to its knees. To really get the weight of his words, though, we have to look at what just happened. I mean, his declaration didn't just come out of nowhere. It landed just weeks after a brief but incredibly intense military conflict that blew up this past June. And wow, did things escalate fast. It all started with Israeli airstrikes. But the whole game changed on June 22nd. That's when the United States launched its own direct attacks on Iranian nuclear facilities. Just 2 days later, a US-brokered ceasefire slammed the brakes on the active fighting. It was a really compressed and really violent couple of days. And the human cost was serious. Inside Iran, the fighting led to about 1,100 deaths. And that figure reportedly includes not just soldiers, but senior commanders, and maybe most importantly, nuclear scientists. That's a huge blow to their program. Now, Iran did retaliate in response to those initial attacks. Iranian missile strikes resulted in 28 deaths in Israel. So while the numbers are very different, it just goes to show that the conflict was deadly on both sides. But let's be real. The major turning point here was the direct involvement of the United States. Now, let's take a closer look at why the US jumped in and what they said they accomplished. On June 22nd, President Trump made this pretty bold announcement. He called the US action a spectacular military success and was very clear about the objective, to get rid of what he called the nuclear threat posed by the world's #1 state sponsor of terror. And these were the specific targets. The stated goal was the complete destruction of Iran's ability to enrich nuclear material at these 3 key sites, Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan, which, as you probably know, have been at the center of international concern for a long, long time. So, the missiles stopped flying. A ceasefire was put in place. But as President Pezeshkian's whole total war declaration shows, just because the shooting stops doesn't mean the conflict is over, not by a long shot. The situation is still incredibly tense. Right, so the ceasefire, which was brokered by the US, it officially stopped the military back and forth. But the war of words that came right after, that's been just as intense, and it proves that the root problems here are far from being solved. And this is a really fascinating part of his interview. Instead of sounding defeated, Pezeshkian actually claims Iran's military came out of the conflict stronger. He then issues this very direct warning, saying any future attacks will be met with an even more decisive response. I mean, that is a defiant and pretty provocative thing to say. So all this leaves us with a huge contradiction, right? We have a ceasefire on one hand and a declaration of total war on the other. How does that even work? Where do things possibly go from here? Well, it seems like everyone in the international community is now turning their attention to this upcoming meeting between the leaders of the US and Israel, the 2 countries that just launched strikes on Iran. Whatever comes out of that meeting is going to be absolutely critical for what happens next. And this is really the central question we're left with. How can you possibly have successful diplomacy when one side has already declared the conflict to be a total war? It's a massive challenge, and honestly, the answer is going to shape the stability of the entire region.